Welcome to Empowered Leadership. We share candid conversations with successful leaders about what it takes to cultivate the leadership, life, and legacy you desire, and to do it with confidence, ease, and joy. I'm your host, Alexandra Reese. Today, I'm joined by Craig Trames, a strategy consultant who galvanizes and motivates diverse teams to innovate new ideas, opportunities, and relationships that deliver tangible results. Craig today owns his own consulting practice. Prior to that, he was the Senior Director of Innovation at Adidas, an experience we will delve into in today's show. And prior to that, he held leadership positions at Nike, Outward Bound, and Coraggio Group, the last of which is where I met Craig. Craig and I worked together on building the travel and tourism practice at Coraggio. And through that experience, I learned that not only is Craig a stellar leader, but he's also a really kind-hearted person who cares about doing well by doing right. I can't wait for you to get to know him through our conversation. So without further ado, let's dive in. Hi, Craig. Thank you for joining us on another episode of Empowered Leadership. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great.
Wonderful. So, given the name of the show is Empowered Leadership, I always like to start with the question, what does empowered leadership mean to you?
Empowered leadership to me really means that it's an experience, right? And it's an experience either driven by an individual or a culture of an organization that you're a part of, that where you feel trust, where you feel clear, you know what's going on, you know that you have a path to take, and you know that the way that you work with people, the collaboration and the interaction is empowering, it's energizing, and that you really feel that you are a part of something important, something with a purpose, and something that where you can really be yourself and be supported.
I love that. So what I'm hearing in a nutshell is empowered leadership is really about the experience that you create for the people who are in your team or organization. So instilling that sense of purpose, inspiring people to live into it, and then creating an environment where people can show up as their best selves every day.
Absolutely.
So I know a lot of leaders really aspire to create that, and then they struggle in that place of aspiration and how to put it into action. So what advice would you give to leaders who want to live in or embody that definition of empowered leadership, but may struggle in closing the gap?
I'm a big believer in that concept of doing and being, and that a leader responsible for a team or a company. I think when leadership, not just an individual, when leadership really understands the requirement of balancing those two things, that, it's not enough to say, well, we have a strategy and everybody knows what they're trying to accomplish and we have the structure to do it and all of those things that are critical. No question about that. And they also understand that the values drive anything on the other side, and the way that communication happens, that the brand itself, and by brand, I mean that the experience of that company organization inside and outside is important, that and that they have strategies on both sides of those things, and they have action items and objectives on both sides of those things. That is where I think that's where it happens, is understanding it's not one, you can't over-index on either side. That's really, really critical, I believe.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. And I love that you brought in that it's not just about leaders as individuals, but it's about the leadership team.
Yeah.
And the leadership team really doing the work to balance the doing and the being. Mm-hmm. And I see a lot of leadership teams, especially since 2020, really leaning into the doing side, because there's just been so much to do that it's been hard to rebalance and get back into that being side.
Yeah.
What does that look, sound, and feel like in action? How have you seen leadership teams be successful in creating that healthy balance between doing and being?
Well, I was thinking about that from the looks like, sounds like, feels like, and I love that
Yeah.
exercise, right? I thought about, it looks like confidence to me. When I see that, and that's confidence by leadership, but that's confidence of the team at large with leadership, that people feel confident in whatever it is that they're doing. Sounds like, play on words here, it sounds harmonic, and by that
Yeah.
I mean there's a melody to it. That doesn't mean that there's not highs and lows and all, and crescendos and not to play on the whole sound thing, but it feels harmonic or sounds harmonic to me. And then the field part is, I jotted down that going back to inspiration, it feels inspired and it feels supported. And I think that you can inspire people to do great things, but I think you need to support them to do those great things too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that metaphor, the harmony metaphor, because I think it illustrates another really important point, which is if you want to get to a place where your team is singing in harmony in a way that everyone feels confident
Yeah.
in embodying that, and it's inspiring for the team, it takes practice.
Mm-hmm.
You can't just come together. Let's say it's a team of 5. You can't come together as 5 individuals who've never established the parts you play, how you riff off one another, and expect to sing in harmony without putting a little work into practicing it.
I absolutely
And
agree.
that's so important to do that work and to be really intentional about doing that.
And just to kind of play on this idea, you're gonna hit a sour note, right?
Oh, yeah.
It is gonna happen, and we're not professionals singers. I mean, it's like everyone's gonna make a mistake, and I think that comes down to, from an empowered leadership standpoint, that how groups of people, teams of people, how leadership and the others, right, in the organization are comfortable with the sour notes too, and can deal with those and help each other and work through those things, whatever that represents, that sour note is. It's part of the whole process. And we all hear over and over again, that's where growth comes too, whether it's a business or whether it's an individual, and how that happens, how that is dealt with is not the right word, but how it is facilitated and worked through. I think that just builds trust and allows people to be comfortable in that. I think that's really important.
Yeah, that notion of just acknowledging we can't always sing perfectly and we're going to hit those sour notes is so valuable. I spoke about this in my conversation last week with Jamie Waltz on the show, and again in my newsletter, just the importance of normalizing conflict, because it's not about you did something wrong or I did something wrong. It's a product of 2 people coming together who have different experiences, norms, ways of showing up, and then those things not being in alignment. And I think knowing how to navigate those sour notes is so important. How have you created space and helped a team to cultivate that practice of really embracing, when we sing off key, how we continue to stay in it together and keep working together effectively?
I look at that in 2 different ways. I'll break it down in from the perspective of my most recent, working body of work at Adidas, where innovation was what we did, right? So going to the edge and pushing beyond what is comfortable or possible to create something. You have to make mistakes. If you aren't pushing hard enough. I mean, that was the job, was to get out in front of everything and find the edge and push past it so that you can actually accomplish something. Again, it comes back to the foundational piece. If people are trusting in leadership and they're both above and to the side of them, that someone's got their back, and that making a mistake is part of the process, not something to be avoided. And that, again, both peers and leaders are there with them, and everybody feels that they're working towards that together. It covers most of people being able to forget what happened or break down what happened and go, okay, here's how we're going to avoid that in the future, because it's fatal or it was just a springboards to another idea. The third choice is lamenting and feeling bad and bringing everybody down because you just can't get over it. That's a choice that happens. But I think when you can reduce that from happening more often than not, then you can move past. You can move past, and people can get onto the next.
Yeah, I love that you brought up your work in innovation because it is really the perfect example of a context in which failure is not only something that you need to learn to tolerate, but it's something that you want to embrace and incentivize. And it's, I'm assuming, a metric that you are often tracking and driving toward. Like, what is our failure rate? How many ideas are we getting out there?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Innovation KPIs it's not it is an art and a science. And,
Mhm.
what we fought within a team of people, 120 plus people dedicated to innovate, in any corporate environment. This is a reality. How many patents did you produce? What was the revenue that was generated? And of course, those are reasonable metrics. But to your point, how many times did we fail? But what was the big idea and that we actually brought to reality? And where is that taking us as a business, as a brand, as someone who might be trying to save the world? And I don't
Mhm.
mean that in a light way. If you're trying to shift and create business and help people perform at their highest athletically, in this case, and save the planet all at the same time, you're trying to do some pretty monumentous things. And but you have to fail to do that, and that's okay. That's okay.
So, a big part of spurring innovation is creating that environment where failure is embraced. We learn from it. We treat it as a jumping off point for growth. I know a lot of leaders today are really struggling with the creativity side of innovation. How do
Mhm.
we generate the ideas? That seems to be coming up a fair amount in some of my own conversations with prospects and clients. What guidance would you give to leaders, teams, organizations who are struggling to get the creative engine running to generate, ideas to go into their innovation pipeline?
Yeah. When it's done well, is you have to create the space for it. Meaning, and by space is time, right? And both individual time and interaction time for people to come together. You have to really believe that it's not that group of people over there is responsible to come up with the ideas and then throw them for other people to work on.
Yeah.
Yes, some people have certain responsibilities to provide maybe insights. It's everybody's responsibility to feel, and this is kind of, you think about empowered leadership, that they can come up with the idea and put it forward and actually have call it a process, a forum, a mechanism to be able to share ideas, I think is critical. And I don't know that happens enough. There's a lot of innovation teams in a lot of different industries, not just the one that I was most in. And I would say we did it as good or better than most, who say, okay, those people are going to create this thing, and then it's going to work through our go-to-market process. And I'll be ready for the handoff, and I don't need to come up with the ideas. I just need to build them. That's oversimplified, but you know what I mean.
Mhm.
Which is different than having an entire culture of people saying we are all innovators. Whether we are pushing a broom or whether we are designing or engineering, or that is, I think, an old model that does not serve the reality of today. And innovation, everything happens so fast today, just by its nature. I don't care what
Yeah.
industry you're in at this point. You don't have to be in a tech industry to think that, as an example, that it happens really fast in tech, but not in my world. That doesn't fly anymore. Everything changes. AI obviously is, I don't care what business you're in today, AI is going to impact it, again, as an example, in one way, shape, or form. That's technology. You're in the technology business, whether you think you are or you don't think you are.
Yeah, that point around shifting from thinking about especially that front end generation of ideas for the pipeline, is it's one team's responsibility to it is everyone's responsibility is such an important unlock. When I led large scale transformation work in operating models and org design, one observation I had with organizations that had that old structure of an innovation team was to people in other teams feeling like, one, innovation is part of my job, but two, benefit in it for me or my team when we do innovation. So there was often a real reluctance to embrace ideas that came from the innovation team. So
Yes.
great ideas would die on the vine because the culture wasn't ready to embrace those new ideas coming in and people didn't have any ownership over them.
Yeah.
So,
Real quick. So in my last role, one of the things that my team, amongst others, but one of the things was we were responsible for a foresight report. So it was looking out 10 years across, and it wasn't just an athletic, it wasn't about, with sports and fitness industry. It was looking at the world and thinking about what could happen but sharing that information and then bringing the entire team into the knowledge that we consolidated. But then what can we do with this? What should we do with this? Brings everybody into the innovation process. And I think that's where magic happens. One of the wonderful things that kind of my leader of empowered leadership, Al Van Noy, besides creating a culture of innovation and nurturing that culture, it was providing mechanisms for people to interact. Even at the structural level, you have designers, you have engineers, you have sports scientists, and you have creation experts working, again, in a handoff model, but working as an integrated model for, what could we do? What should we do? How might we do that? And again, how might we is a really, really important question. And then, great, we're going to make a decision together that is going to ensure successful outcomes.
Right where I wanted to go next, which is saying, hey, if we want to embrace building that culture of innovation, how to put it into action. And a few things I'm hearing that sound like great practices an organization could adopt would be, one, bringing external insight into the organization about what's happening. So doing that foresight work, open people's aperture.
Yep.
What's happening in the broader world is a foundation to spur dialogue and ideation around what does this mean for us?
Yes.
And I'm hearing, of course, you need to have space because we can't innovate and get creative when our mind is on, well, I've got 2 more emails to write and then a kid to pick up in 30 minutes and I've got a 25-minute block of time.
Right.
Really got to have space to get creative with pressure. And then the third I'm hearing is mechanisms for interaction.
Yes.
I'd love to hear a little more about what that might look like in practice.
Oh, I'll give you some great examples. I'll give you a great example. So one of my responsibilities on the strategic side of running the strategy for the innovation team is portfolio management, meaning 100 different products that we were doing, or maybe at one point in time, that ebbs and flows. But portfolio is designed to support where the brand is going and then where the brand can go. So that our mission was twofold. We needed to fuel the future of the brand and fuel the brand. And what that means is there's things that are closer in that you have to make happen. That's part of the day-to-day. Then there is things that are completely new or a real stretch for where the brand might go. And that could be a product or it could be a business model and any number of things in between. So that with those things, you had 100 things you're working on that you want to have balanced across, and you're working with the rest of the company to make sure that everything's in alignment. For that, it kind of goes back to giving people the space to what's the mechanism that you can have for feeding things that aren't being briefed by the company and are absolutely something that you're passionate about, or that are people who come together and go, you know what, I think this and you think that, and what if we did this? To have a mechanism for those ideas and a process and a forum, as I've said earlier, for people to go, you know what? I've been working on this on the side or in the space that I have been given to work on innovation. You think, here's the opportunity, here's how it's serving the needs of people out there, here's how we can do it. The beginning of what it would take to bring this thing to life. Shark Tank situation, right? But it is a conversation around, wow, that's really interesting. What would you need to do that? How could we support you? What might the next step be for the idea to develop a little bit further? But having that is an amazing thing because it gives people the confidence and the way to serve up something that could change the world. Hey, we're doing these 100 things. Let's opt these 5 because this thing that we've seen develop over the last 6 months that isn't part of our overall business innovation plan, it needs the juice. That in itself builds confidence in the culture of the team. Lets people know that anybody, not just that person or that person, is responsible for what's next. It's something that is repeatable, and you can build it into your process. But there's a lot of creativity and a lot of opportunity also as part of that process.
Benefit that comes to mind is the benefit for talent retention and talent attraction. Look at the data especially from the last 2 years on, with the top motivators for people to change jobs, top factors they consider when they're choosing between opportunities and what leads them to stay. It's often opportunities to grow and develop and opportunities to do best more. Clients doing that are at the top of the list, especially
Absolutely.
for high performers. So creating opportunities for people to get creative juices going, ideate, and try and move things forward is not only good for the business portfolio, but it's really good for talent retention and acquisition. And it probably costs a lot less than the other strategies people are trying to employ, like throwing more money at people.
Absolutely. I definition this group of people creating amazing things for the future performers, right? In regard of what they know and what they bring to the team is there's a threshold that they've reached by even being a part of the team, which is amazing, right? It truly, you got the best and the brightest, a whole group of the best and the brightest working together on what's next is energizing in and of itself. But you didn't provide the way for them to work, you would lose all of the equity with all these high performers. So what you just said is it's no less important just because a person has a high capacity for accomplishing whatever it is they're great at. And I have to be working with more PhDs or the levels of people that I've ever worked with. They're no different than any other team. If you don't have the culture and the ability of ways for them to work together, it's not important to stand that. Then it falls apart. And this is really, it's really clear who's successful and what can very easily deteriorate into a toxic organization, into an energizing organization, successful organization.
You didn't say this connection explicitly, but it's implied in what you shared, which is healthy culture requires clear ways of working.
Yes.
Because you can have the best and the brightest people in the room, but if you're creating norms that enable them and empower them to work effectively together, you will have dysfunction and you will have a toxic culture. And I think so many leaders that miss the importance of clear, consistent norms that are then reinforced when cross a line or break a norm. Being able to go back to our earlier conversation around conflict, having norms around how you work through that so that you're reinforcing those ways of working is important as getting the best and the brightest in the room together.
Something really important, I think, I just want to a little bit because I like the way you talk about norms. I believe creativity and innovation and process go hand in hand. But I also believe at the same time, and hopefully this isn't in conflict with each other, just relying on the operations or process without the norms of how you do it, it's a recipe for disaster. And innovation is a great example because there are people in the world who believe that innovation is linear, and I firmly believe that it's not. Move from left to right if you're a left to right person, in from a process standpoint, but it's not linear. Things do happen. You have to have the ability to work in chaos and still move left to right. And as long as you're checking things off that need to get done, something complete that's at the end, and the norms to be able to do that, and the comfort to be able to do that, which is not easy for a lot of people who understand innovation, the reality of innovation versus the idea of innovation. There's a difference between those two things.
Couple things that were particularly important or impactful team.
Kind of going back to an idea can come from anywhere. It's a norm, and this is a quote from Al, that innovation is born, not briefed. And that's not to say that a business need, if you want to call that a brief, is relevant, of people working together to fuel that spark into a flame, and then that flame into a fire, is a critical norm. And that's around teamwork and communication and support and removing roadblocks and protecting an idea, maybe even killing the idea because it didn't pan out. I think that's another norm from an innovation and success standpoint. Is how many organizations might you have seen where, whether you call it a sacred cow or something that says, "Oh, we invested too much to quit now." It's like, well, maybe
you're going to keep investing more.
Yeah. So
something that's not going to work.
And here's another great example. Sometimes a great idea is a great idea and will be a great idea, but the time is not right. So an example that I could say is, the insight is correct. The outcome for what that product or experience or whatever is valid, and we have a huge opportunity. Technology or this way of doing it doesn't exist yet. It's okay to put something on pause and put it on the shelf and go, you know what, we're going to keep working this insight, and there's going to be an unlock, that there could be an unlock in the future that, when fit into that thing, can revitalize that idea to be the big idea that it was thought to be at the very beginning. And you keep investing in it, right? But you're comfortable going, not now. We're going to prioritize over here and invest our time and energy and people over here. And I think that's hard for people to do sometimes.
Think about what the most important norms are. I think it's embedded in what you just shared, which is it's figuring out what are the hardest things for us to naturally do, and how do we create some norms about how we do those things to make them easier, especially that tend to be stress inducers, like killing an idea or like navigating conflict, like kind of storming through
decision making. Norms around decision making are hypercritical and poorly understood by a lot of people, and that's not because it's hard. Decision making is hard to pick what mayonnaise you're going to buy. It's really hard to think about where are we going to invest $10 million. Is also, how are we going to make decisions? How are we going to your point, I think navigating conflict and decision making kind of go hand in hand. How are we going to do that? People decide. I think maybe this is the unlock is on any given project or thing, you might decide what the decision making process is going to be for that thing. Not be the same on every level, but I think also from an empowered leadership standpoint, and give people the ability to make the level of decisions and give it to them, and not again within reason, not question that. Then again, that's the ripple effect for that positive and negative is really cool.
For organizations who are interested in innovation, interested in moving more quickly, preparing and leading the future, the most critical bottleneck is decision making. And it's typically leaders don't delegate power, or they don't have the trust to delegate the power of decision making. So they end up being a bottleneck.
Yes.
And then when they get into the decision making room, they have no established criteria. They're making a decision. They don't have clarity around, is this a consensus decision, a majority
Right.
decision, or forming, but there's really one person in the team who ultimately has the authority to decide.
Yes.
And so it ends up being about who has your voice, who has more soft power. And the lack of healthy norms around decision making, I think, is a top source of dysfunction within leadership teams today, and what ultimately does prevent organizations from taking the work they do, innovation in portfolio development in the strategy room and executing it
Yes.
to results.
I couldn't agree more. And then if you have some of those things figured out, access to, if not the person who is making the decision, or time frame for when a decision needs to be made so that things can move at a healthy pace.
I worked several years ago as a strategic advisor on an agile transformation.
Mhm.
And this organization really wanted to improve software delivery. So the one constraint they wanted to put on the transformation was we could not touch the process for request.
Mhm.
And the current intake process was people in the rest of the business, the internal customers would make a request, state a problem, and then the leadership team for the software development department or group will filter all the requests as a team, make a decision about what will we put in our pipeline, what will we do about them, and how will we sequence them.
Mhm.
And that can't touch that. You can't improve speed to market.
Yeah.
There's nothing you can do in the delivery side that will address types of delays in decision making.
Is you mentioned earlier about norms and great cultures and great leadership is about how people come into an organization. You know, I'm a huge proponent and have developed a number of different onboarding and that was a really interesting thing from bringing someone in. I talked about this amazing group of highly successful people, but how do you bring another highly successful person into organization, and the norms around doing that with forethought and with a real plan for getting someone up to speed and productivity, and thinking about it over thinking in the terms of what does the first year look like, not what does the first week or month look like. That's another norm that I from a highly successful organization that think in those terms. And is the path of that person beyond 1 year, 2? That I think is a really important norm for organizations to think about. And
Especially
sometimes
today.
it's rushed. Oh, we got to get someone in the seat. But when you have a process for doing that, and then norm of understanding its importance, and have that I think is another great thing for any organization to think about.
I would say it's one of the most important things hire managers, acquisition and management teams, managers onboarding new people should be thinking about today. Because I think used to rely a lot on the informal connections that people would make by virtue of working together in the office to create a social network, create that team cohesion and sense of belonging that ultimately we now know are huge contributing factors to people's choice to stay in an organization. Now, with those informal interactions, people don't have the opportunity, the knowledge, the ability, and the support to build the type of social network and cohesive team that enables them to really be successful, not just in, to your point, the first 30, 60, 90 days, but in the first year and beyond.
Yeah.
I do want to ask, as there were a couple questions I wanted to make sure we covered as we near the end of our conversation. One is, you mentioned in preparation for today that you had given some thought to who are leaders that most influenced you at different periods in your journey. And I'd love to just create space for you to share what were the biggest insights that you had from that.
There were people who helped, and but once I got into transition, into, even in college. Some of the people that I met while I was, were immediately after college, a gentleman by the name of Peter Mintz, who's just been a personal and business mentor of mine, who took me under his tutelage and just taught me great things: being mindful, setting a course, being consistent, and thinking big. He was great. There was a doctor who I butted into a conversation working at a sporting goods store in Santa Barbara, and I butted into this conversation with this woman named Peggy Marchbanks, who was a jazzercise instructor. So I'm totally dating myself. This is the mid 80s, and
Yeah.
and this gentleman, Chris Lambert, who was a ER doctor. The two of them were creating a preventative health program, which mid 80s was kind of a revolutionary thing. And I was pre-med in school, and I butted into this conversation that turned into an internship, and we become, he's a mentor of mine too, my entire life. Those are two early individuals that at that transition of school and going to work for real, I just thought about these amazing lessons that they told me that I've built upon the decades. And then, I think about going into Nike. I was 29 years old, 28, 29 years old. And, the sales manager for the company who, from Jersey, with all of the requisite, sayings that you might imagine from the time and from the geography, was in showing what might not at the time been considered empowered leadership, but in retrospect, you go, exhibits of trust and support and challenge and clarity and inspiration. I love Billy Compton, and I had a boss, Gordon McFadden, within Nike, who, when I was running a portion of the outdoor business, and he came in to be the leader of this big initiative that Nike was going to grow the outdoor business to great heights. And he came from the outside. He wasn't a homegrown Nike person, and so he brought in some really great perspectives that I thought I was the dyed-in-the-wool guy, and he was the new guy. But he opened the door for me to see things without blinders on, which I really respect. In fact, the reason I left Nike, not because he got rid of me, but he saw a growth opportunity to become a leader at a senior executive level, at the CEO level, and made the recommendation, and he helped me lose my fear for what it would be like to leave the blanket of warmth that I thought corporate life was, to a not-for-profit and outbound. I mean, I thought as a CEO, that was he was an empowering leader.
To have a leader who you're in their team and really they really value you, and yet they're willing to let you go because they see something to you that's bigger than what they can create for you in their own space.
And what I could even see necessarily myself too.
Yeah.
That was a great boost.
I love that. And story illustrates a couple, I think, important points. One is, regardless of what stage we're at, people in our lives who to open our aperture and experience new ways of thinking and doing things, get in your 20s or in your 50s or 60s and beyond. For giving up that drive to surround yourself with people who don't think and act like you.
Absolutely.
And I think another is having to approach people that you admire or respect or bump into and really butt in.
Yes.
And I think a lot of people are very nervous, even people who are in the C-suite, they're very nervous about they're intruding on someone's time. Gift that you're giving to somebody when you say, I respect you, I really admire what you've done. How open would you be to a coffee?
I think people are by and large are conditioned to want to help others, but it takes the unlock to ask. And you don't be asking for a big thing or a question. I think is sometimes all it takes. But I think we do live in a world where personal interaction is necessarily everybody's most, I won't say best skill set, but comfortable skill set. because
Yeah,
there's so many
I would
ways
agree.
to communicate or touch people, and they all have their place. But I'm a huge proponent of somebody go, hey, I'd like to ask you a question.
Hence
Yeah.
why I do this.
Yeah.
I get to do this every week. The last question I'd love to ask is, I think I'd shared this with you before. There was one piece of conventional leadership wisdom that you think is outdated
Mm.
and no longer relevant. What would it be?
That the hierarchy of position is the mechanism for decision making and success. I think is still overly relied on, and oftentimes too when you bridge even outside of the United States into a global culture, where hierarchy can overpower greatness. That's something I think we're no place for. You do need structure and you do need decision making, but I associated with that. But I think an over reliance on that is work.
Would absolutely agree. And I think it's a good cherry top of our earlier conversation about the importance of, if to move quickly,
Mhm.
be the most effective, you have to distribute power and decision making down through the organization. And
Absolutely.
your ability to let go of those two things is a measure of success, not a measure of failure,
Yes,
a lack of intelligence or ability on your part as a leader.
completely agree.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Craig. This was an absolute pleasure. I really
Thank you.
appreciate it.
It was really fun.
Empowered Leadership is brought to you by me, your host, Alexandra Reese. And are you a leader who's ready to dramatically improve your leadership, life, and impact, and do it with greater confidence, ease, and joy? Then I invite you to find me at my website, opastrategy.com. That's OPA strategy.com. And then make sure to search for Empowered Leadership in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you listen to your favorite shows. And please do rate, subscribe, and share so you don't miss future episodes and you can help spread the word. It means a lot. You can find Craig on LinkedIn. Please check the show notes for the link to his profile. As always, thank you for joining and have a lovely day.